Hello, Working Within listeners, and thank you so much for tuning into another episode of the Working Within show. As you know, and I've learned from our past more than few episodes, we've been focusing on highlighting Black leadership stories on this show and serving awesome Black social enterprise leaders. And so through that work, we've been able to have some amazing guests on the show to share about their passions, the work they're doing, the organizations they're leading, and so much more. I am very honored to have our guest today because she is one of those folks who, you see and learn about them, and then you're like, I wonder if I'll ever speak to them, and then suddenly they're on your show. That is what is happening today with Gabrielle Wyatt, who is the founder of the Highland Project. I will let her share more because I really am excited to hear her story as much as you all are. But just know, as we start this episode, I am being so serious when I say that I learned about the Highland Project through Instagram, I think, and just been following it since. Really appreciate the work that she's doing, and now she's on the show. So Gabrielle, thank you so much for being here. And would you please introduce yourself to our audience?
Sure. Thank you for having me. I'm excited for our time together. I feel honored and blessed to just be in a sacred space that is focused on telling our stories, because so often a lot of leadership development, social change writing that we see on our Instagram feeds can feel so whitewashed, and yet we know we are the drivers of that change as Black women in particular. So it's not lost on me the power of this space and what it catalyzes and restores. I'm Gabrielle Wyatt. I am the proud granddaughter of Ruth Wyatt, my grandma, who is about to turn 100 years old in about 30 days. I am the proud daughter of Mary Alice Wyatt and Quentin Wyatt, who met teaching back home in Baltimore, where I'm from. They created a household that deeply valued the brilliance of what would become their three girls. I'm the youngest of three girls. My sisters are incredible, incredible educators back home that I want my own children to be in front of, to be learning from, to see their brilliance actualized in the eyes of. And I am the proud founder of the Highland Project, which I'm excited to talk more about today. We are focused on building and sustaining a coalition of Black women leaders who are really seeking to redefine wealth with their own personal sustainability at the core.
I really appreciate how you went first to honor your grandmother and your parents. I don't hear that often, but it is like the result of their actions and being that we get to be. I know I'm preaching to the choir in that way, but that's so respectful, and also just a way to share gratitude. So thank you for sharing that way.
You're welcome. Yeah, it's, I was thinking about it when, in coming in here, and, particularly with my grandmother, she's about to turn 100. And at the beginning of March, all of our first cohort of Highland leaders had the opportunity to meet her. And as I continue to reflect on what I know was history made that day, that we will feel in generations to come, I just was thinking about how much really is proximate to us that we might not think we always know. And I think, that the fact that a woman who was born in 1923, a Black woman for that matter, is alive and thriving today, that means we all are proximate to a sustained woman, to a woman who actually has found practices to not only sustain herself, but to create a family who would go onwards to sustain themselves, and onwards would become public servant leaders, right? Who deeply valued not just being involved in their community, but truly investing with their gifts in their community. And I think that's the lineage of my family, and the lineage that she certainly has been the matriarch of. And so just in listening to you, I wanted to name that as I think about where I've been in my journey. I think often particularly in the conversation we're going to have today about Highland and how we focus on well-being and centering well-being as essential for social change led by Black women leaders and the continued progress of this nation, there are so many narratives that tell us that the idea about sustainability is so far-fetched for us. And yet I've realized in my own journey and my own healing and my own just development of my relationship with my grandmother and my parents in particular, they have always been examples, right? And those little seemingly small examples exist that tell me we know our power of what it means when we are sustained. And how can we create more conditions for us to practice that more regularly?
Sustainability. You're absolutely right. That's been such a not even hot topic. It's been relevant, is the way I would say it. Like, especially since the pandemic, folks have been realizing whether or how their practices either are sustaining them or not. And the fact that you're able to look upward and to your past and where you come from to find like practices, and then you have all of the rest of the world also giving us practices that must be valuable, because in a way it's deeply personal to you to look in that direction. Mm-hmm. You mentioned that public service is part of your lineage as well. And that resonates with me. My father's in the military, so that really resonates. And you mentioned that your parents are educators. What has your public service journey been like? How do you identify with that term?
Yeah. My gosh. Well, I have to share that I don't know if this is embarrassing or resonates with folks. I grew up in a home of educators. My two older sisters very quickly stepped into the vocational calling of our parents and of our lineage in education. And I always thought I was on that track. And I say that because I was like, I don't know if this is an overshare, but I grew up playing school. Like, I grew up asking for chalkboards, and I've still been asking for that overhead projector. And I just began to think, maybe think about my own craft, right? Of like, what would this look like with my stuffed animals? And I had the opportunity to go, right? My stuffed animals were named after the 1998 gymnastics team. Here's to Dominique Dawes and her brilliance in particular. But I had the opportunity to go to magnet school outside of our community. I particularly had the opportunity to study acting, which became a real calling to me. I believe that the arts are essential to social change. The arts teach us about humanity. And so I share that because in my journey of figuring out my role or roles that I wanted to intentionally step into as I came into my own being, I became a little bit diverted, right, from a traditional teaching career that I had saw cultivated and nourished in my household as I stepped into the arts. And in high school in particular, I was in this moment of really trying to figure out, like we all were, right, of like, how are we making meaning of what's next after 12th grade, right, in so many ways. Some I'd like to repeat, some I would not repeat. But in what I would always repeat was finding and studying the playwright Bertolt Brecht. Bertolt Brecht was a Holocaust survivor, and he created a type of theater meant to make you so uncomfortable that you'd leave in the middle of the show to perform a political act. And at that time, I think I really began to internalize where my father was teaching, where he taught for the majority of his career, which was Milford Mill Academy in Baltimore County, which at the moments before integration represented, the peak, if you will, of quality education in a segregated environment for Black human beings. And after integration, right, the stories we know of the benefits and the costs of integration to our communities. You saw the flight of Black talent. And then the decades begin of underinvestment in human capital and financial capital and human potential in the school building. And frankly, I felt incredibly guilty. I felt a lot of shame that I had what I felt like was this like golden ticket I had somehow taken from someone else. And I was angry. An educator in my building, I feel like there's always an educator in one of our stories, right? Who sees that moment that you could choose the fork in the road, right? And that educator said, like, you seem really angry. You can do something with that. Why don't you run for school board? And in Baltimore County, you're able to run for school board. They have one student member with nearly full voting rights. And so I ran for that role. I earned it. I was appointed by the governor, and I never looked back. Right. I like stepped in and and it was an alignment of stars for me and my leadership at that moment, because we had a Black male superintendent, Dr. Hairston. He was the first to ever disaggregate student achievement data. He truly believed in the power of voice. He was one of the first superintendents to have a student council that he met with on a monthly basis. And I said to him, as I told him about the experiences that led me to run for school board, I shared that I knew, while a biracial Black girl, I still was not representative of the true lived experiences of other Black girls in the city and in the county. And because of that, I said to him, so I don't think it's going to be enough for us to talk to the students in student government, because I think they all, while they might have, some diversity, they still have often in an academic record shared experiences. And the most beautiful gift he gave me was believing in my voice and believing in co-powering. And what do I mean by that? My senior year of high school, for a couple of months, once a week, we would travel together to a high school. We would just say we were coming, and we would grab students from the hallways, not the students who always were given a table and listened to. And we would sit and talk about what was actually happening in the school building. How close did they actually feel that they were to attaining their goals that they were manifesting? And most importantly, what did they need to get closer to achieving those goals? And I've just come to really appreciate that example of really feeling like I was co-powered with. That is one of the top examples I can name to you of feeling like I was co-powered with as a biracial Black girl. So, after the board, I continued to work with them in different ways through undergrad. I did not choose a career in acting. I chose the path of political science, wanting to deeply understand policies, institutions, and resource flows, and how that related to really creating liberation in our communities. I went then on to the Kennedy School knowing that I needed a master's in public policy, that toolkit, that training to really enter where I wanted to in systems change in education. And after the Kennedy School, I had the opportunity to come here to New York City, which is where I now live. It's about 12 years ago or so. During the last couple of years of Mayor Bloomberg's term, to work in the portfolio planning office for Brooklyn, which meant that I was leading some of the still to this day most impactful set of school reforms, and also most controversial. We can talk more about that if that's of interest. And shortly thereafter, went to Newark, New Jersey to lead strategy and innovation for Newark Public Schools against the backdrop of a very large philanthropic gift that had been announced on national TV. And after that, stepped into a role in really figuring out how do you move resource flows, i.e. philanthropy was what it was defined for me at the time, to really truly center not only Black and brown voices and leadership, but justice. And so for a number of years, advised a few high net worth individuals on creating funding opportunities for leaders of color in the public charter school space. I became a founding partner at the City Fund, which is a large national education foundation focused on bold change in education. And I'll pause there because I think that was really, for me, a turning point moment in how I began to put a constellation of experiences together for what now is known as the Highland Project.
Do you feel like when you're able to look back, it's easier to thread the story together?
That's a good question. I mean, I feel like that's probably true. I think it's like I don't know,
right?
60-40, 50-50 kind of thing, right? One thing our chief daydreaming officer at the Highland Project, Octavia Rahim, always says to all of us is, it's already been written. And so I don't think, I think sometimes it's like, are you spinning? Like folks are like, is this just like that perfect constellation moment? No, but I do also believe I've become to deeply sit with those words if it's already been written. And I come to sit with recognizing my own power of the ways I've stepped into more intentionally moving in alignment with my values, and more intentionally stepping away from this notion that it's about title and role, right? Which I think we so often, ask any kid in school what they were asked about the future, and most will say, I was asked, who do I want to be, right? What job do I want, right? And I want to be a doctor. I want to be a police officer. I want to be a teacher. And I wish that we asked kids, like, what do they want to leave behind? What do they want to be known for? What do they want to create? And so I think, in listening to your question, I think, what has been a part of this journey is getting more and more clear that it's not about a role or a title. It's not about a feeling of an obligation to stay within a specific sector or entity, but it's about, what are the ways that I can move in the world? What are the different Gabbies within me that need to be present in order to achieve the legacy vision I have for myself?
Legacy vision. And legacy is a big part of the Highland Project as well, right?
That's right.
Okay. We're going to dive into it. I asked that question, the one about, does it seem clearer when you're looking back? Just because I know, especially when I was making meaning in 12th grade, I had, nothing to go on other than what I had heard, lawyer, doctor, math, right? And those things, none of which I would love to do right now. But recognizing that, for folks who are just beginning careers, for example, or feel like maybe you haven't necessarily found that thing yet, as Gabrielle just mentioned, it is a series of different levels of fulfillment and ways that you've shown up for yourself, and leadership journeys you're able to take, or roles you're able to play, not necessarily position, but ways that you get to act that actually tell you the story of where you can go and where you like to go. Just like she mentioned, when you joined the school board, that was a moment for you that showed you, oh yeah, this is for me. But it didn't mean she knew, right, that she would be leading the Highland Project right now. And so just the magic of it all, the faith. And I love what you mentioned about Miss Octavia Rahim saying it is written. That is a deeply peaceful statement, and something we can fall back on when we do sometimes feel confused about where we're going. It's hard to always know the exact next step, and sometimes we don't need to.
Yes, hands down. She said to me recently, she said to me this week, and even if you think you do know the path, and you probably are on the wrong path. And I was like, ooh, I don't know. I need to think about that for a moment, right? And what I believe she was saying was, some of the next steps might be known, but if every single thing seems to be known, you should be in inquiry with that. And so I think about, the power of what I hope is one of the legacies of the Highland Project is supporting all generations and asking the questions as they're stepping into roles, right? Or thinking about making a large or small and everything in between life choice, that we enter with an intentionality to ask, what do we want to learn in these moments, right? What might be the moments in which the inevitable happens, that there is friction or conflict between a set of my core values with entities, with individuals. Because this isn't about, right, foolproofing your life, right? But it's certainly about presence, right? We time and our breath are non-renewable resources, right? And I think that for every moment that we sit in roles that are not deeply connected to the legacy we want to leave behind are moments that we don't get back. Moments we don't get back progressing the visions and the feelings, the laughter, the colors that we want to leave behind.
You just said many profound things. I'm trying to pick one to chew on without even know. Oh man, you cannot get that time back. Well, the first thing you said, time and our breath are non-renewable resources. I wrote that down as soon as you said it. That is such it's the most succinct way to say the truth about our energy. And like you just said, it runs out. We cannot get it back. And so having the critical lens and not critical, but like you mentioned, curious, inquisitive lens on the actions we take, what we choose and say yes to, and how we feel about things is really important, because each day is one that will not be repeated. And that's a very solemn truth, but important one. And also what you mentioned about core values, having a set of those, and then again, not foolproofing, but using them as guidance, as guideposts for decisions too. In this world, for me, in the past and presently, sometimes is so tough. And so listeners, definitely, we're not trying to say this is how to live a perfect life and make perfect choices, but these are ways that you can begin to analyze kind of where you are and how you're feeling about things. So thank you for that input, Gabrielle. Okay, we've got to dive into the Highland Project. And many things. You've mentioned so many things. I want to talk about the core values topic. I want to talk about that resource flow topic, because that's very real in Working Within's mind. But first, let's jump into the Highland Project. You paused in your public service journey because you were like, when you were advising for the fund development work, this is when you understood and began to see the Highland Project. Could you tell us more about that process and how you got started?
Sure. So when I was at the City Fund, in addition to, the philanthropic and board advisory role that I held, I began to manifest what it might look like to invest differently in Black and Latinx leaders of education nonprofits and advocacy nonprofits. Really out of knowing so deeply and just embodying it myself as a Black woman that we exist. I don't believe when we talk leadership development, it's a pipeline problem. I don't believe that. I knew that from my diligence trips to cities where I sat at Black and brown tables. I knew that through my own membership and involvement with EdLoc, education leaders of color, that through my own very lived experiences. And at the time, and I guess this was probably 2018, I also knew that for my generation, the generation coming up before me, the generation behind me, and the generation ahead of me, we were entering, and really, frankly, in the thick of, what felt like a never-ending incline up a very steep roller coaster of pressure, of violence against our bodies, against our children's bodies, and more. And, as the daughter of Quentin Wyatt, who was a social studies teacher and a historian for our family, I deeply believe in history, which says that Black women and girls, communities of color, we have been at the forefront of leading change that has led to economic prosperity across the board, that has led to multi-generational wealth and opportunity across the board for the nation. And yet, if we are understandably skeptical of stepping into leadership at this time because of the real violence and pressures that we then feel stepping into those roles, because of the lack of capital, the lack of cover, the lack of true allyship that can and does exist, what will happen? What will happen? Not just for the nation's prosperity, but for our own bodies and the bodies of our kids and kids to come. And so, I look up my soapbox.
No, you don't.
I, had the opportunity to, I was like, oh, I got on a soapbox there. I'm going to stop and get back on my messaging points. But on my public service journey, I began to design what it might look like to have a leadership development opportunity that did not center deficits, but centered assets of leaders, that didn't come at it with an assumption that we needed technical assistance in a very specific set of areas, but rather a focus on recognizing our power and how that power can be intertwined throughout communities to create and leverage sustained change. And I really like Louisa Villa, who is one of the originals of EDLAC, and Megan Sara, who now leads AmeriCorps. They were my gurus at the time in opening my eyes to a whole different world that I didn't feel like in the education circles I was in was being talked about true power building, about true coalition building, about durable networks. And so we launched together the City Leadership Fellowship at the City Fund. And I had the incredible privilege to lead the first cohort. And that cohort evolved and unfolded against the backdrop of, we didn't know it at the time, right? But entering into what would become rolling shutdowns, of entering into a time where too many Black bodies were murdered on our screens and continued to be retweeted on our screens, when it felt like a moment in time when a tide might change when it came to racial justice. And as that was happening, a few things for me were also unfolding. One, personally, as a leader, I began to question, was I sitting in the role I wanted to be sitting in? That was the most intentional role I could be sitting in as I was watching these events unfold. Was this role in alignment with where I perceived I needed to make my next legacy move in pursuit of my vision of multi-generational opportunity? The second was that I was observing with my peers, with Black women I look up to, even if I've never met them, because they're like, Issa Rae, right? Like I observed the deep and very communicative burnout, and what I saw certainly in my grantees, whether they were my direct grantees or not, was that burnout was inextricably linked with the very complicated and often toxic nature of fundraising and our support of Black leadership. And because of my coach at the time, and the stillness that was forced on me for the first time in my career, right, of shutdowns, particularly, I lived in this whole time, I stepped into the space of the unknown, of stillness, into the power of that pause, and began to write a concept paper. And it just became, this little thing I would do on the side of, Meg just kept saying, what could this look like? What's missing? What have you learned? Start to put together that constellation, right? And so the Highland Project evolved into this, to me, seemingly simple, I think to a lot of people, bold choice, vision statement, whatever you want to call it, that Black women are essential for change, for structural change. And Black women deserve to be invested in, and invested in beyond a seed grant, beyond a training program, but their whole being deserves to be invested in, as well as their dreams. And so the Highland Project is building and sustaining a coalition of Black women leaders across sectors and generations, all who are tied together by a couple of beliefs. The belief that structural change is essential when we're talking about thriving communities and multi-generational opportunity. The belief that we need to redefine wealth to be more holistic, that it's more than dollars in pockets, but it's access to great schools, healthcare, outdoor space, and more. And a belief that our own sustainability is one of the largest levers to creating multi-generational change. And so that is the Highland Project. That is really where it began to bloom from the seeds of my public service journey.
I have to mute myself and scream, everyone. Oh, man. Because Black women do deserve to be invested in. Absolutely. And we do have visions, and we do want to create changes in our communities and neighborhoods and in this country. And we want to be leaders, and sometimes others don't want us to be. And so everything you said, I snaps to that. You can't hear the snaps, everyone, but snaps to that. And listeners, something to point out to you all, when I first met Gabrielle, again, fangirl moment. I remember we had a quick chat just to get to know each other before we got the opportunity to record this. And when she says our own sustainability is part of our wealth, I remember I asked her, if there's any way I can support you at any time, let me know. And she said, you can support me by taking care of yourself. And so just in many ways, and I've never heard that before, right, Gabrielle? But Black woman to Black woman, it's just so clear with your vision for the Highland Project, why sustainability is so important. And you just truly do endorse that because there is a lot of violence and burnout and pressure, as you mentioned, in leadership in general. Of course, leadership is a difficult, rewarding journey, but then you add layers of identity and traumas and histories that are passed from generations to our bodies, like you've mentioned, and it becomes a more complex cocktail of responsibility with Black women in leadership roles. And so I just find it so powerful, as you mentioned, power building, that you've been able to take your experience in you have such deep experience. This is not you coming up with an idea. This is a result of experience and a wealth of knowledge, that wealth word again, that you've been able to create this mechanism for supporting Black women leaders who are doing great work and who have done great work. So I just want to give you your kudos for that. Absolutely. And I'm going to breathe because you said breathing.
You got this. But thank you. I appreciate you. I'm a little verklempt.
Of course. Of course. I guess so. Just one more question about the cohort. How exactly, and you don't, again, I don't want you to give all your secrets, but how is the cohort structured? How is it different from another leadership program? Just so the listeners can appreciate that difference.
Yeah. And, I guess I'll start with saying Highland should be in everyone's journey. And I actually believe that versions of Highland have existed before, perhaps in disparate places, though, or siloed places. But I believe every human being deserves a Highland. And I think some human beings do have Highlands. And I would say the second thing is, what I believe is unique to Highland is, we don't view ourselves as a fellowship. We view ourselves as a coalition. And a coalition that all begins in their entry point at Highland in the same way, and that's in a cohort-based experience where we are deeply exploring in an intergenerational community where both cohorts to date represent 4 generations of Black women leadership. They are also cross-sector. We have consistently invested in leaders in education, political agency, well-being, and economic empowerment, all very broadly defined, not just in term, but also in terms of types of leadership. We have filmmakers, we have healers, we have educators, and more. But it's just to say all roles are needed, right, as we pursue multi-generational change. But they're all united by going through an anchoring experience with their cohort that's deeply grounded in an exploration of defining personal sustainability, practicing personal sustainability, exploring what rest can really mean, and the power of what can be seeded clarified, catalyzed by rest. They're all deeply anchored in experiences of traveling together to learn about different definitions of wealth and how they've been pursued, how they've been taken away, how they've been destroyed in our communities. And so it's not just a one sector view of wealth that we explore together. They are all anchored by experiences deeply rooted in centering creativity as keys to how we begin to vision 7 generations forward. And so it's a little bit about, what anchors the community is this, really in a way like an initiation into what does it mean to step into a space that is asking you to extract 7 generations forward of your vision. What does it mean to step into a place that's asking you to imagine, then piecing those visions together, right? And in effort to co-power together, right? To support one another and move closer and closer into that collective reality. That experience is anchored by one-on-one coaching that's really focused on legacy visioning. It's not traditional executive coaching. Again, because Highland's place in the world is not technical assistance or traditional leadership development. Highland's place in the world is about what I think we are not talking enough about, particularly as practitioners, particularly in philanthropy, which is imagination. If you think about capital that is available to us, I think about it in 3 ways. We have capital to seed and accelerate ideas. We have capital to build scale, whether we define that scale as going miles wide or miles deep. And then there should be capital to imagine, i.e. the MacArthur Genius Award. I think what we've seen, particularly since 2020, is more advancement to seed capital for Black and leaders of color. Still not enough and still very important, imperfect, but we've seen a lot of capital move into that space. We have seen not enough capital move into that build space, right? That build space around scaling, but we have seen capital move. And yet we still see grants not really touch this imagination space. We know that quite literally. Grants are structured to 1, 2, 3 years at best when you are a Black leader. Like, let's be frank. We do not, call me listeners, if you know a Black leader getting longer than a 3-year grant, I would love to understand, genuinely. Right? But what does that mean? It means that we're thinking quite literally on 3-year clips at best, which means maybe at best we're achieving 5-year goals. And I will say it's therefore a stretch to me that you can tell me we're really achieving a decade-long goal. What happens then? It means we're spending all of our energy, not only fundraising as a community for the basics to be invested in, but it means we're working on strategies that reflect playing defense and offense on challenges that were created prior. We're not able to look around the corner. We're not able to look around the corner multiple generations ahead. And so the space we ask people to step into, the capital that we provide them with as they're stepping into that space, is all anchored around imagination. It's all anchored around imagination. And so that's why our coaching is not about technical assistance. It's about how do we extract what is in ourselves and in our lineages to put together our visions, to identify how we might use Highland Capital to test that vision, to take risks with that vision, to catalyze that vision. And leaders also are, equipped with the resources of the Highland community. I think we're a really regenerative organization. Our networks continue to grow deeply so that leaders, when they do need that technical assistance, right, or they need a door opened, or they need a voice at the table, that they still have that community there and aligned with them as they're making their moves.
A sacred space. You've built a sacred space and are maintaining one for our Black women leaders. I love the anchor on 7 generations forward. of your vision, the legacy you want to leave. As you've already mentioned, it is so uncommon. Like even when I first learned about the Highland Project, I was struck by that, just because when you're working day to day, it could be a social impact organization, business, you are thinking in a calendar, trying to just meet the next milestone and create the best metric in the shortest amount of time almost. And so that room for imagination, and even in, as you mentioned, your own story with how the Highland Project was birthed came from you having space to imagine. And so I'm just now thinking about how much can be created when we have the opportunity to pause like that and be incentivized to create almost rather than to respond.
Yeah, that's right. I agree with you, and I think I would be remiss to not say a few things about like the real privileges and conditions that go into pausing, or creating those moments to pause, right? And so it is to go without saying, but I will say, right, I was not an essential worker during that time of that pause. It goes without, I will name, have had spaces that have consistently invested in my leadership development. And so I feel the need to name the real realities of conditions and privileges that are not consistent across the board. And I feel the need to name that for leaders. And these practices still are proximate. And so what do I mean by that? My own practices, if it's helpful, include things like waking up and spending time by myself first, which requires me to wake up earlier so I'm not caring for my household. But it's bending time for me. It's spending time in a way to, even if it's 10 minutes, have that space for myself of how do I want to start the day? How do I want to enter the day? Is there something I want to pay gratitude forward for? It looks like not stacking my day with meetings and really being explicit about that, not only with my team, but explicit about that with the community that works with us, however you define member of our community. Because I think if you're moving in that way, then you're not pausing, right? You're missing these moments of being able to decompress, to self-regulate, to download, to think, to enter. My good friend who was my business planning coach, she's now my board chair, Shauna Wells, she said in a space earlier this year, it takes 15 minutes to fully be present in that space. And so I think about that a lot, right? Of like, that is why you need at least a 15-minute break in between, right? Because you can't go back to back and step in and you're not therefore present until 15 minutes in to a 30-minute meeting. That's just left, right? Like it's if you begin to think about that, right? Of like, what does it take to be present for myself and for the table I'm sitting at? It really begins to, for me at least, shift my approach to how I schedule myself. And the last thing I'll say is, as I think about like the pause, like I think it means really auditing what Shauna would say are your two Bibles, your bank account and your calendar. Those two things will never lie. They will never lie about the life you are leading and the life you are creating. And so if you're a listener and you're thinking about like, how do I start to put my constellation together, right? Or how do I have these moments of pause? I'm like, have that 10 minutes every Sunday, or you choose the day of the week to look at how your money is moving in your personal bank account, to look at how that time is moving on your work and your personal calendar, to look at how that time is moving in your organizational budget. It will tell you the truth of that moment in time. And it will lead you to deep questions, I hope, about what needs to happen next to move in alignment with what and where you want to be.
Yes. Thank you for bringing those tactics forward. because that makes it really accessible to everyone listening, and also simplifies. Like, yes, look at your calendar, right? Just like that's step number one. Look at your calendar. Create 10 minutes. Like that does make this accessible. So thank you for breaking that down, Gabrielle. I felt the same way in the pandemic. I was not an essential worker. And so, that time actually gave way for me to paint. I had never painted outside of like art class in elementary school. I was painting a lot. And this podcast was birthed during that time. And so I'm not a builder. I'm like a put it out immediately. Like if I were you, Gabrielle, I would have put that concept paper together in 2 hours and sent it to everyone. That's how I am. But I put this podcast together. It was not aimless. It was not focused on Black leader. I mean, it was aimless. It was not focused on Black leadership. It was focused on depth of conversation, really. And that was it. And now it has become much bigger than a podcast. And I'm grateful for that. But again, it was birthed out of that space that I had the privilege to access during the really quiet time for some of the pandemic. And so just being able to make that, though, a more daily practice will benefit me as well, because I am moving from a space of just totally overwhelming myself. Like, absolutely. And so it's also timely, the conversation we're having, because it has been like I've been blocking days on my calendar and like these practices that you mentioned, because that survival mode, the defense offense term, that's not going to work, and it's not sustainable. It's not sustainable. And if that were like, yes. I feel like that's just been a huge theme for our conversation. It's such an important one. What has been most fulfilling about your journey with the Highland Project so far? And what are you looking forward to with the Highland Project?
I would say the most fulfilling part is the various ways I have heard with my ears and seen with my eyes Black women rest. And, what I think about, a lot of folks know in our space that when you are invited to apply, the meeting you have with us is actually with Octavia, and it's a meditation and daydreaming session, because our application centers around the 7 generations question, right? And so in order to step into that space, so we believe we have to begin with rest. And what has been beautiful to watch after seeing that unfold for 2 years are like women who now, and maybe always have, like, but it was fewer in the beginning. We see it to be more of like showing up in their beds, right? Or laying down in their beds, or when we finish that, you're like, oh my gosh, well, there's a few women still sleeping, right? And but it names to me, I just know like that is the work. They are working while they are resting. And that brings me a lot of joy. The like inevitable maybe snore that you might hear at some point in a Highland gathering literally makes my heart flutter, because I know that it takes courage, it takes vulnerability, it takes trust in a space, it feeling safe, to even contemplate.
Yes.
Closing your eyes, right? To even contemplate beginning to regulate your nervous system. And I just know in that choice to even close your eyes, a transformation is happening. And that might sound woo-woo to folks listening, to use shorthand, but I just know that from my own experiences. I met Octavia virtually as I was beginning to business plan in fall 2020. And I knew that choice of just paying money to just sample a class represented a transformation. It's something that Gabby, who grew up in continues to love sweat fitness, right? And thought that was well-being. It meant something that she actually was saying, wait a second, I have a curiosity about this woman who's saying, I'm gonna lay on the ground and learn how to rap. Right? Like, if I didn't come back for 3 more months, right? Something would have been seeded that day. Something was seeded that day. But yes, so that is, it's not that TED Talk, but that has been the most, one of the, I was like, I don't even know where we are. But that has really been fulfilling to me is that. And I think it is hard to quantify that, to measure that, for, to bottle that up as you fundraise. But I deeply believe in the power of rest. We know models of it in our culture. We know from things like a MacArthur Genius Award, when trusted leaders are given capital that enables them to go learn for 2 years, to rest and create and try for 2 years, we get innovations like 1619. Right? We get innovation that propel our nation forward. We know this to be true, right, in academia, where there's a set time in which you go on a sabbatical, and we know what comes back as research that progresses our nation forward. We know this is true with things like the Aspen Institute, when you can take time and be a resident, and it progresses things forward. So we actually have a lot of proximity to this notion of the power of rest for leaders. But alas, where we are. As I think about like what's ahead for us, y'all, we're recording.
I love it, Gabrielle. Don't worry.
It's Friday. But as I think about the year ahead, well, we're 4 months into that year, which is a little insane to say. But what I'm looking forward to is in about 2 months, we'll be with cohort 2 in person for the first time. And so I'm so excited for us to wrap our love around one another as a community. I'm excited for being on like that next journey with the coalition. I'm excited to expand our coalition at the end of this year. I'm excited for cohorts to meet one another across the organization. I think the ground will truly be shaken in those moments of Highland leaders coming together. I'd say that the last thing, and that I'm looking forward to, is just continuing to watch what unfolds for myself, for my team, for the organization, as we continue to unlearn, reimagine, step into, we call them our strategic intentions at the Highland Project, but we know ourselves even better now than when we launched, and we'll continue to get to know ourselves even more. And I think about that in small things, like the freedom I now feel on things that seemingly simple to some, like your Instagram, right? Of like, no, it's okay to show extreme joy and extreme pride. It's not just that we have statistics about the challenge we're seeking to solve, right? And that might seem like a silly or trite example, but a Gabby 5 years ago would not be reposting a reel of Viola Davis because Gabby would be up what she thought a funder would want to see. And so that's what makes me really excited as we continue to legacy build. It's just every day we literally are getting closer to knowing ourselves and our true power. And I'm ready for it. So if you really want to see our Instagram, follow us at Lead Highland on Instagram. And you'll see what I mean.
And do follow it, y'all. Actually, do follow it. Always posting Black women forward content, and I love it. I love it. It's a unique platform. It centers the experience of Black women, and just shares a little bit, but not too much about the cohort experience and the coalition work that the Highland Project is doing. And Gabrielle, it just sounds like I love hearing what you said about the rest. I also have that relationship with rest that I am working on, but also just the authenticity of, it sounds like the relationships and the relationships you're able to facilitate and build within each cohort, just because of the nature of the work that everyone has buy-in to. Like, everyone is there to rest. Everyone is there to create and leave legacy, and being able to do that and have such freedom to pursue something like that with a group of other women with the same goal and intention. I can only imagine, what that space is like. And like, what other way to build power among folks who have common goals and intentions? So cheers to that. Cheers to cohort 2.
Thank you.
Of course.
We're excited.
This is my last question for you. Well, it's my second to last, because I'm also going to ask how folks can stay connected. But this is my last question for you is, the folks who listen to our show are usually earlier in their careers and kind of in that meaning finding place of what am I here for? Not even what am I here to do, like, what am I here for? And usually younger women are listening to this show. What do you want to say to them? What do you want to say to the listeners about what you've learned, what they can learn?
I'll just speak to like my younger self in this. However, you define young. I still am young. But I come back to something we talked about, about 30 minutes ago on this podcast, which is, I just wish my younger self was asked, and honestly didn't wait to be asked, just asked it of herself more. What do I want to leave in this world? What's my vision for, one day I or my sisters or both will have children, however you define that. What do I want them to experience differently than what I've experienced? One day they also then will have kids, however you define that. What then is different for their kids than how they experience things? How can you keep asking that question with another generation forward? I now think about that through the lens of, how have things changed since 1923 for my grandmother and not, as it relates to my legacy vision, so that I can start to see and learn from the last
historian
through the last 100 years through her eyes, right? But 100 years forward. And it's, I share this, just start with your own family, because this is proximate. Your vision is known. The seeds are all out around you. But I encourage you to not get distracted by what leadership looks like on social media, to not get distracted by what wealth looks like on social media, but get distracted by the seeds. And so the practice that I like to lean into for folks early in the journey, no matter if that's because of generation or they're starting fresh, however that's defined, is to draw a circle in the middle of the paper and write me. Draw 3 dots to the right. And the first dot, I write the name of the young people in my lives. I'm an auntie. That's Wyatt and Olivia for me. And I write about the one thing I hope is different for them than it was for me at their age or for their generation. That second dot, I write as Wyatt's future kid. And I ask myself, what's going to be different for that kid? What's the one thing? And then that final dot, that third dot, I write Wyatt's grandkid. What is different for that kid? I do the same thing then to the left. And the first dot becomes my parents. What was different for them? because to the second dot, their parents existed, my grandparents. What then was different because the great grandparents, the third dot. You'll start to constellation map, right? I think sit with that, right? The answer might not be clear right away, but it will begin to point you in the direction of a vision where 3 to 4 more dots are drawn to the right of what you see. The second thing I'll say is, after you do that, I would encourage you to think deeply about what brings you joy. What are the ways in which your joy is expressed that further that vision? Early on in college, I interned on Capitol Hill, and I learned quite quickly I hated that. I hated federal government. I did not believe it was where it was at in terms of real on the ground change. And that was great because it didn't have me wasting my time. And I learned that my skill set and what brought me joy wasn't coming out in that environment. And so that's an example, right, of on that list, it says, you don't play on the federal government scale, Gabrielle. You love local change. You love locally driven change. And from there, as you start to curate that list of what you love, that could be I love traveling for a job. Then I would ask the next question of, well, then how many days does that really mean for you? How many days a week do you want to be on the road? Because it starts to give you a roadmap as you look at job opportunities to say, it's not about the title and org, right? But am I doing the things that actually I love doing? Am I doing the things that will support my sustainability? Trust me, being on the road 5 days a week will not. Trust me, lived through it. But it might suit you for a period of time, right? You might say, I need to do that in order to figure out then the next part of my legacy building. I hope you get where I'm going. But I think it's not about, I need to be at this organization. I need to have this title. But I need to start vetting job opportunities through the lens of, am I learning what I want to be learning? Am I contributing the skill that I know brings me joy and will catalyze change? And is this a space that is going to enable me to actually protect, explore, practice my own sustainability, all of the above?
I love the activity. I'm doing it right after we close. Oh man, I can't wait to release that for the listeners as well. I love that. That's a great exercise, and underscore everything you said about joy and listening when you really don't like something. Because I used to work in a bank and I really didn't like that, and helped me understand where I need to go to. So thank you, Gabrielle. And you mentioned Lead Highland earlier, at Lead Highland on Instagram. Where else can folks check you or the Highland Project out?
I know Twitter's complicated, but we're also on Twitter at Lead Highland. Our website is thehighlandproject.org. I'm on LinkedIn as Gabrielle Wyatt. And I started, my own as I listened to you tell about the journey of the podcast, I did press go on something that was not fully built, right? But has certainly been bringing me joy. And that's my own blog and vision board, which is called The Stillness Ranger. So I am on Instagram at The Stillness Ranger. And the blog is thestillnessranger.com. And it's really an exploration of how essential nature was to the next part of my journey in understanding stillness and rest and building Highland. And so check it out. It's a monthly post and a series of weekly noodlings, reflection questions, and birds. Love birds. So
okay. Well, yes. Plus one, all of that. Follow the Stillness Ranger. She's right. We will make sure that it's all accessible in episode description and post as well. Gabrielle, thank you so much for coming on the show and representing yourself, your journey, as well as the organization you've built, the Highland Project. I'm so excited that I got to hear you talk about this. And I can't wait to see more Highlands pop up, as you mentioned. I can't wait to see more in the evolution of what you're doing and creating with you and all your leaders and your team. So, listeners, you had a great show today. I know it. Thank you so much for tuning in. We at Working Within promise to continue bringing you dope Black leaders who are doing dope Black work. And we'll continue to support them as best as we can. Thank you so much for listening. Make sure you tune in for another episode when you can.